I said in the last video that one of the most interesting things about scene 10 actually is that it's not the last scene of the play. And what we in fact get in scene 11 is this slightly odd scene in some ways that's set a while after the events of scene 10, that just follows Blanche as she's basically removed from the house. In some ways you could argue it doesn't add a lot in terms of dramatic effect. It's certainly not a big climactic scene. But I think the point of this scene is, again, one about encouraging the audience to choose between two interpretations, and I think that's set up right at the start. So on page 98, we're told that the atmosphere of the kitchen is now the same raw, lurid one as of the disastrous poker night, but then equally the building is framed by the sky of turquoise, so we get the lurid colours and the atmosphere of the poker night, but then also this much more lyrical blue sky or turquoise sky in the background. And that sort of emphasises as Stanley speaks, and he says, you know what lucky is believing you're lucky. It's very much the idea of the American dream. It's also very, very much a material belief, isn't it? You know, that Stanley has won materially. And I think this scene is about seeing that, but then also perhaps seeing a slightly different way of viewing this scene, so that we see that Stanley isn't quite on top. And that's into that top of page 99, whereas Blanche, well, Stella says that she's bathing, you know, she's still surrounded by the water, and that water imagery only increases as the play goes on. Stella says about a third of the way down that where she's going, she's got it mixed in her mind with Shep Huntley. Stella's interpretation is that Blanche has got confused. I would argue that actually Williams invites the audience to see something a little bit more interesting going on, that's slightly voluntary, that Blanche has essentially chosen the madness, because the madness offers Blanche exactly the same escape as Shep Huntley does, you know. Through madness, Blanche has given herself a shot of genuine happiness with a man like Shep, you know, because in her mind, Shep can be what she wants him to be. Real life has surely taught her that men aren't that. They either go the way of Stanley or they go the way of Alan Gray. And there's a real irony bottom of page 99 when Stella speaks to Eunice, and remember those two are parallel throughout, and there's that hint that essentially Stella's going to turn into a Eunice-like figure, that she's stuck in this cycle which has been referenced throughout the play. And Stella says, I couldn't believe her story and go on living with Stanley. So ironically, despite Stella telling us that Blanche has got things mixed up and is living a lie, it's Stella, we realise at the end, who actually is living a lie. And Eunice says, don't ever believe it, life has to go on, no matter what happens, you've got to keep on going. And there's that hint that, you know, yes, Stella is a survivor, but she's also stuck in this cycle, and she's also lying to herself and turning into essentially what Eunice becomes. Page 100, towards the top, Blanche enters. She has a tragic radiant in a red satin robe, following the sculptural lines of her body. The word tragic is used. It's not used a lot by Williams, and it's used right at the end of this play to describe Blanche. She's got a tragic radiance, and in terms of tragedy, what that means is there's a greatness there. You know, Greek tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy, they're about great figures, and so there's that implication that Blanche has now become tragic because there is something great about her. We see her as actually ascending beyond the mortal level. Blanche stands quite still towards the bottom of page 100, the silver back mirror in her hand, and look of sorrowful perplexity, as though all human experience shows on her face. So again, this mirror isn't about Blanche being exposed to reality, it's the opposite. Blanche is representing all human experience, and if we see in this play as a bit of a metaphor for being in purgatory, is that not what Williams is doing here? You know, it's almost like he's setting this up as a battle for the souls of the audience almost. We have a choice in how we interpret this, and that will ultimately sort of get us into this purgatorial state, and we'll have to choose one way or the other. We'll have to choose the literal world of Stella and Stanley, that Williams reflects to be a bit of represents to be a bit of a cycle, or we choose a much more tragic or much more meaningful interpretation that Blanche seems to go for. It's hinted at on page 101, halfway down, Blanche says, I'm anxious to get out of here, this place is a trap. Yes, it's partly Blanche's madness, but there's an element of truth in what she's saying. And actually, Blanche is wearing this jacket, and they're debating whether it's lilac or blue. Blanche says, you're both mistaken, it's Della Robbia blue, the blue of the robe in the old Madonna pictures. Now, we've had this blue at the start and at the end. Stanley is wearing blue denim work clothes at the start of the play. The play ends with Stella with the baby in a blue blanket. And Blanche talks about blue in this scene as well, but she relates it to the robe of Madonna, you know, the Virgin Mary. So there's an irony that it's the Virgin Mary, but it's also her, you know, ascending again, and also gaining that innocence that she's been seeking throughout the play. So, you know, almost through the blue, Williams is giving us a choice. Do we see it as a sign of denim and work clothes in the real world, or do we see it in Blanche's way? And then we hear the cathedral bells, as Blanche has talked about, the Madonna. She says those cathedral bells are the only clean thing in the quarter. So with the sound as well, Williams is giving us that choice. You know, the music of New Orleans has been replaced by actually the music of cathedral bells. Blanche then on page 102 goes on this slightly bizarre bit where she talks about dying at sea. She says, when I die, I'm going to die on the sea. And she says later on, in the blaze of summer and into an ocean as blue as my first lover's eyes. So again, it's this water imagery of Blanche, you know, which has been set against the fire by contrast. It's that sense of Blanche through this metaphorical death, achieving that innocence finally that the bathing has been all about. But again, there's that blue, you know, the ocean is going to be blue as her first lover's eyes. Again, blue for Blanche is something symbolic, something that represents innocence and something that you can't find in the real world. You know, all these baths, she can bath as many times as she wants in the real world. It's only with this metaphorical death that she can actually escape. In the same way that it's only through fantasy and madness that Blanche can get this man that she's been looking for throughout the play. Blanche then goes through the room, and we get this line towards the bottom of page 103 where she says, please don't get up, I'm only passing through. Earlier on, Blanche said as she entered the room, you know, don't stand up, and Stanley says, that's fine, nobody's going to stand up for you. Here they do, so again there's that sense of getting tragic dignity here, but also I'm only passing through. It's that idea that Blanche has been in purgatory throughout this play, and this is her finally sort of passing on and ascending through her madness. She then speaks to the doctor. She starts to get worried. We're told halfway down page 104, the Vesuviana is filtered into weird distortion accompanied by the cries and noises of the jungle. Blanche rises and seizes the back of a chair as if to defend herself. Again, we're hearing what Blanche hears. We're thrown into her head. When the matron says, hello Blanche, the greeting is echoed and re-echoed by other mysterious voices. We are forced to hear and see what Blanche hears and sees. Ultimately, we're siding with Blanche here. It's not Stanley. It's Blanche's view that we are getting. Stanley offers Blanche a lantern, halfway down page 105. He crosses to the dressing table and seizes the paper lantern, tearing it off the light bulb and extends it towards her. She cries out as if the lantern was herself, and of course William's point is, it is. You know, in this play, the lantern is something that just softens reality. That's exactly what Blanche has done. Blanche is very similar to Tennessee Williams himself. They're both adapting reality to get a deeper truth, and it's shown again in this lantern that to Stanley can only ever be a lantern. Stella runs out into the porch with Eunice following to comfort her, so again those two are linked. Towards the bottom of page 105, Stella says, what have I done to my sister? Eunice says, you've done the right thing, the only thing you could do. She couldn't stay here, there wasn't no other place for her to go. So again, there's that sense that Stella and Eunice are in this cycle of real life in New Orleans that doesn't allow any progress, whereas Blanche has actually got out. You know, Blanche has actually in some ways managed to escape it. As we go on to page 106, Mitch stands up to Stanley briefly. He speaks wildly. He says, you done all this, all your goddamn interfering with things you. Notice Stanley's response, quit the blubber, and then hold this bone-headed crybaby. So ultimately, Mitch has been fallen into the Stanley trap with Blanche, you know, and tried to be this man like Stanley, and ended up, you know, being quite close to raping or sexually assaulting her. And now here he falls down the other way of being, I guess, where Stanley basically says he's a crybaby, he's blubbering, he's a child, he's not manly. And again, William shows that kind of dichotomy, really, that men are forced into one of these paths or the other. So, you know, yes, Stanley seems to have won, but equally, life in New Orleans is presented as exactly the trap that Blanche said that it was. The doctor then softens, he takes off the hat, and suddenly he becomes human, and it's that human that Blanche leaves with. Top of page 107, she says, whoever you are, I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. Really famous line in the play. But it's that point again, through Blanche's madness, the doctor finally is the southern gentleman that she wanted. It's a guy who can show her kindness, but also lead her in the way that the southern gentleman should. So it's a great image of actually Blanche through this madness. You know, yes, we could see it as Blanche lying to herself, but equally we could see her as Blanche finally attaining what she's been looking for throughout the play. That's echoed then when Stella shouts Blanche, Blanche, Blanche. Blanche walks on without turning. You know, so ultimately the two sisters do go different ways, and it's Blanche who walks off the stage, becoming tragic with this symbolic death, and it's Stella who's stuck in the trap without a voice, not being heard, and you know, without any kind of outlet other than to become Eunice. So, you know, ultimately there's an argument here that Blanche has won, and certainly if we take the interpretation of the play that is much more expressionistic, much more about what Williams is trying to do and how he bends and twists and removes reality. And then at the end of the play, the final stage, or one of the final stage directions, Stella sobs with inhuman abandon. There is something luxurious in a complete surrender to crying now that her sister is gone. Eunice was also described as sobbing luxuriously earlier in the play, so there's that link between the two. And then oddly, the scene ends. One of the final lines is Stanley actually soothing her, and then he kneels beside her and his fingers find the opening of the blow. So it ends with Stanley again using sex as a way of getting round Stella and getting what he wants. So ultimately, you know, Stella is stuck in this cycle. Stella is trapped just like she was, whereas it's Blanche who has escaped and found that southern gentleman that yes only exists in her mind, but she has been allowed to find, and can, you know, her happiness can exist if the audience go with that. I think that's the interpretation that Williams is encouraging us to take. So the final line, this game is 7 cards stood. Yes, on the one hand it shows that nothing's changed, that Blanche wasn't tragic at all, that life just goes on in New Orleans. But another way of seeing that is that actually, yeah, life does go on. Blanche has escaped it. And this scene, I guess, if you want to go really meta-theatrical with it, this scene will play out night after night after night. Every performance of this play will be there, like this cycle that Stella and Stanley are stuck in, whereas actually Blanche has done all those things she said. She hasn't gone out to sea metaphorically, she has followed this gentleman, she has gone up, she has ascended, you know, with the cathedral bells and the references to Madonna. She has, yes, metaphorically died, but also metaphorically escaped and ascended. So I think that's the significance, I think that's the image that Williams wants us to be left with. And I guess the future of Stella's baby is the same as the future for the audience. You know, Stella's baby is wrapped in a blue blanket. Is that going to be the blue of the denim of Stanley of the real world, or the blue of the Madonna picture of Blanche in a fantasy world? And I guess, you know, maybe it ends with the battle for the soul of this baby, and similarly the soul of the audience. You know, which point of view are the audience going to take here? And I think that's what maybe Williams wants us to be thinking about as we leave the theatre.